Sorry, headphones.
All right. Hi, this is Ibadi NX from the Arcanum, and today I'm going to walk you through kind of my process for handling raw files. Um, there are no shortage of tutorials on there about how to use Lightroom, but I kind of wanted to sort of give you the thought process behind how I use the software and some of the things that I think are important to think about when you are um, processing your images. So let me share my screen and let's see, screen share. How can I do that?
Hey.
Hey, Chuck. Um, I should just do the screen share. Let me see. Ah, there she is. Okay. All right. You should be able to see my Lightroom screen. And can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So first, I want to show you why I favor using um, RAW files over JPEGs. JPEGs certainly have their advantages in terms of the way the images look straight out of the camera. Each manufacturer optimizes the file for contrast, for color, for white balance, does all these sort of magical things in order to make the image look really good without us having to do any heavy lifting in terms of the settings. And while it's really convenient in order to be able to do that, there's certain limits to those files. I'm not going to get very complicated into it. If you want, you can read that article that I posted earlier in the week about the RAW versus JPEG. But just suffice it to say that it's kind of like you're dealing with a RAW file. You're just dealing with a lot more information. So it gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of massaging the image and making it look the way that you want to look. When you use a JPEG, you're pretty much deferring to the presets that are available in the camera, and all that data is sort of baked in. While you can make some tweaks and make some adjustments to a JPEG, um, if you get stuff wrong, like the white balance or the exposure, it is so much harder to fix a JPEG than it is a RAW. And uh, while I'm still making every effort that I can to make the image look as good as possible in terms of exposure and white balance in camera, um, I always know that eventually when I bring it into Photoshop or Lightroom, that I'm going to be tweaking it. I'm going to take it further than what the camera was capable of doing. So here is an image that I took in Paris at the Sacré-Cœur, and this is the raw file. So if this is straight off the sensor of the camera, and it was a cloudy day, so it wasn't really a high contrast light, and you can see that this image, well, it's a good exposure. I mean, I have good highlight detail, like a good shadow detail, but the image looks flat, and the reason for that is that the camera doesn't enhance it in any way, so it leaves that up for me to do. And one of the first things that I do is I first want to establish the black and the white points in the image. So when I think about attacking an image, the very first things I'm considering are if you look at the histogram here, this is a tonal representation of all the data in the file from the darkest black all the way to the left to the brightest white on the white. So I tend to work from the outside in when I'm thinking about working on an image because I think it's really
I'm not,
important to,
I'm not seeing the histogram. Am I missing it?
yeah, it's in the upper right hand corner.
Not on my screen.
Okay, is anyone else seeing it?
No. Yeah, it's missing.
Oh, okay. Can you see the tools on the right hand side
Yeah,
in
we're,
Lightroom?
we're just seeing a little bit more than the frame.
Okay.
All I can see is the picture.
All right. Let me see if it is. Okay, that's not going on. Let me see if I can make this a little smaller. Hold on a second, guys. You're seeing the second screen for some reason. Okay. How about now?
Yes.
Can you see the histogram now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we're getting the full Lightroom panel now.
Okay, great. All right, so here's an image. It's pretty flat, so I'm going to establish the black point. Here's the histogram here, and this gray area here represents all the tonal data for the image. So from black all the way to white. And then you have the data for red, green, and blue, and yellow, green, and magenta, or all the other colors here. So what I'm going to first do is I'm going to establish my black point. And what I do is I hit the Option key and then hit the black controller, and I just move this over to the left. And then you can see that this area in black is indicating to me what area goes to complete black, depending on where my slider is. So I'll just go until I get a little bit of black there. And then I'll go here to the whites, and I'll move this around to see exactly where I start blowing out. And it blows out pretty early. Okay? So those are the first two things that I can do. You can also hit these indicators at the top. And so instead of hitting the Option key, you can just move the sliders over, and you'll actually start seeing where it starts blowing out without hitting the Option key. It's a matter of preference which way you want to go. I kind of prefer hitting the keys. So you can see here just that change makes a marked difference in terms of the overall look of the image. Once I've established that, then I'll go to the exposure slider before I do anything else. And I find that typically they tell you to sort of work from the top to the bottom, but I find that I kind of bounce around depending on what I'm trying to do with the image. But the black and the white points for me are really the biggest critical consideration that I have to make. So now I'm just going to adjust the exposure, and that's primarily going to be affecting the midtone area. So I just want to make this just a little brighter. I'm not going to have to do it by very much. So you can see how this, I can go really a whole lot here, but you can see that it's affecting everything here. And I'm paying special attention to the area here because this is my point of interest in the shot. So as I'm making all these adjustments, I'm being real careful that I don't do anything that sort of hurts the overall feel of the shot. So I go about here, and I like the level of brightness that I have there. Now I have to start thinking about the rest of the image. I like the presence of the clouds here, but they're maybe a little bit washed out. I want to bring out a little more detail there. And what I can do is I can use the highlight slider, which is going to be paying attention to these quarter tones here that are just shy of anything that's really bright white. And I can move this slider, and you can actually see that it starts making the clouds a little darker. It also makes areas around here a little darker as well. And I'll just go from one extreme to the other and go back and forth, slowly refining the look until I get something that looks along the lines of what I want, which is about right there. And then next, what I want to do is I want to open up these shadows a little bit. They're slightly underexposed. I don't want it so bright that it competes with this area of the frame, but I want it a little brighter to reveal a little more detail. So what I'll do is I'll take the shadow slider and I'll move it up. And again, you can go really extreme, and then you start getting very sort of an HDR effect. I don't want to go that far. I kind of want to have something that's just a little more detail, but not too much, and somewhere around right there. Okay? So now we go from this to this. Okay? So it's a big improvement, and this is one of the reasons why, even with an average scene like this, where you have the full range of detail, you can see that the raw file provides you a great opportunity to really improve the quality and the look of the images. You can go even further with other controllers, like clarity includes basically controls mid-tone contrast, and you can start pushing this, and it's going to affect all the sort of midtones that exist throughout the scene. Some people are very aggressive in terms of their use of clarity. I tend to be very conservative in terms of it. So if I zoom in, you can see if you go a little bit too far, it starts getting, for lack of a better word, kind of crunchy. I don't want a whole lot of that. I just want a little bit to sort of reveal the details. So I'm going to go for about plus 17, plus 15, something along those lines. And then after I've done this, I may consider adjusting the white balance. If you have an image that's underexposed and it looks like the color cast is off, I recommend doing these adjustments here first before trying to tweak white balance, because I've often found that if an image is underexposed and it looks like it has a bad color cast, sometimes it's just an exposure problem. And when you correct the exposure, suddenly the color cast problem that you had is either completely eliminated or reduced. This looks like the white balance was pretty accurate. I probably had the white balance set already for the cloudy setting. But let's see here. You can go here a little more warmer, or you can go a little cool, and you can see the dramatic difference here. So let's say I just want to go just a tad warmer. Yeah, about right there. Now the next thing that I'll do is, after I've done all that, I'll go into the tone curve, and this is just to improve the overall contrast. With an image like this, especially under this kind of light, it's flat light, so I am going to have to boost the contrast. And one of the first things I do, or I try out, is these presets here for the point curve. I'll use medium contrast just to see how that looks, and sometimes it will give me just the amount of contrast that I like, and then I'll just leave it at that. If I don't like it, I'll go back to the linear, and then I'll just create my own S-curve by moving the lights up a little higher here, and then the darks just a tad. So it improves the contrast, but without, exaggerating it a little bit too much. So if we take a look at the image now from where it came from to this, you can see a huge difference. So to a large extent, when I'm working with files, this is the extent of the editing that I'll do in Lightroom. I'll do some other things, and I'll show you that in some of the other images. But you can see that it's amazing what you're able to do with just a few minor tweaks. But what I think is really important is that you always have to pay attention to how you want the shot to be. Here, this is the core of the shot, the church. But the secondary elements, like the clouds, the people on the stairs, the green of the grass, all of those things are important. But I don't want to do anything that compromises my main subject. Here's I'll show you a shot here of a portrait that I made recently, and I'll show you really quickly the images here. So I was at Banjo and Fiddle Festival, and I walked into what is used as a saloon. It's basically an old sort of ghost town that's actually used a lot by the film and television industry to make films. And I walked into the saloon, and this guy and his girlfriend were taking pictures of each other, and I asked him to pose by the window. And I just had him, trying out a variety of different positions, trying to work with the light, trying to come up with an interesting gesture or body language. This was starting to work a little better for me. And then he put his hand on in his pocket and turned towards away from the window. And then I said, "Hey, why don't you turn towards the window?" And I said, I felt I really had the shot there. So this is the shot that I'm going to work with here. And you can see that already I've got a good quality of light, good color. The exposure is really spot on here. And I'm going to tweak it. And again, just like the previous image, I'm going to be doing some minimal tweaking to the shot. You're not going to see me doing a lot of heavy-handed stuff. So we're going to start again from the basic control here. This is the day where I'm having a lot of trouble technically. I can't believe it. Let's see. Is it freezing on me? Okay, it's back. All right, so I'm going to start with the basic. All right, so I'm going to go with the blacks and see where the blacks are. It's not working on my trackpad. On my. What is going on here? Okay, let me restart Lightroom. Sorry about that, guys. Today I was trying to do an interview for the show over Skype, and I just had hella trouble. It just drove me absolutely nuts. So of course now I'm having problems with Lightroom, which never happens except when I'm when I'm in live and I have an audience. But I'm not going to curse as much as I usually do. This is being recorded. Okay, it'll take a second. But while it's doing that, does anybody have any questions while I'm loading this up?
Yeah, Benix.
Yeah.
When do you start to think about localized adjustments, or like like I really like the basic adjustments, and it's neat to be able to either brush them in or use the gradient or the radial. When do you start to think about those?
I'll show you that in this image. That's a good question. So here I'm going to make those broad adjustments, and I'm going to do those really quickly because I've already been over them. So I'm going to establish my black point here. Look at my whites here, and I can see that I'm kind of blown out here. So, and here I can see that I'm blown out here in this area of the window here, and that doesn't really matter. I'm paying attention to this area here on his shirt because I'm more concerned with that than I am with this little bright spot that's in the window. So I can see that I can just pull it back just a bit, and I can retain just a little bit of that detail there. I don't want to go too far, so about right there is going to be fine. Okay? Then I'll go into the highlight slider, and this is where I'm going to pay special attention to this area of the shirt, because this area of the shirt is a little brighter than what I want, because I like the overall shot, but one of the things that I know as far as the portrait is I don't want the shirt to be the center of attention. And right now, because it's so much brighter, the eyes are going straight there. I'm going to want the face to be really the starting point of the image, and I want people to sort of flow their way around the image from that. So right now, the shirt is in control, and that is not something I want. So I want to bring down the highlight detail in the shirt. So I'll do that, and you can see here that as the shirt gets a little darker, so does the window on the far left, and that's fine for me. It's making the image a little flatter, but I'm going to correct that a little later. And then I can take a look at what's happening with the shadow detail, and that I'm not really concerned about because I know I'm going to increase the contrast a bit. So I'm going to leave that at 0. So now you can see here. Unfortunately, I'm not using the virtual copy of this here. So here I have the flat image here, and then you can see now with all those adjustments that my highlights here are really all the way down to about a quarter here. So it's underexposed. The overall shot is underexposed by way too much. So what I can do here is I can either go to my whites and try to bring them back up. And you can see how much brighter he's getting there. And I'll only go about this far and then pull it back. Don't want to go too far. Okay? So there you can see a real nice improvement in terms of the overall shot. Okay? I'll apply a little bit of clarity, but not much, because I'm dealing with a portrait here, and I don't want the face to get too country. So I'm just going to increase the clarity by about 15 here. And then here with the tone curve, I'll immediately go with the preset for medium contrast to see how that looks. And I really like how it makes the overall image a little darker. So let me see what the full contrast, strong contrast does. That's way too much. So if I go back to medium contrast, that looks good. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to personalize it. So I'm just going to go into this light slider here, and then the dark slider here, and have a little more control in terms of what I prefer in terms of the overall look of the image. Okay, so I like the overall look. As a result of all the tweaking that I've done, I've noticed that the color is popping a little more than I probably like. Um, a lot of people like to sort of boost the saturation, but that just way too much for me often. What I often do, especially for portraits, is that I'll increase the vibrance, which is more catered to tweaking of color for skin tones than it is like for landscapes and things like that. And then I'll reduce the saturation by almost an equal amount. So the vibrance helps to boost some of the color, and the saturation helps to reduce the saturation in some of the other colors here. So I'm getting a really overall really nice look. And then lastly, and this is usually the last thing I do, but I want to show you real quick before I do any sort of localized control, is that I'm going to apply some sharpening to the image. Because one of the things that you'll see if you compare your JPEGs to your RAW files is that the JPEGs look so much sharper, and that's because the camera is applying all this built-in sharpening to the image. The RAW files don't have the benefit of that. So when people first started shooting with digital cameras and were shooting RAW, they would take a look at their pictures and they would complain, God, my pictures aren't sharp. There must be something wrong with my camera or my lens. And it was just that, well, they weren't sharpening their images. And when you pull your images up, when I pull my images up, I tend to apply a little bit of light, what's called pre-sharpening. And the default in Lightroom is 25, but I tend to favor going up to about 50. You'll find if the higher and higher the megapixel of your camera, say for example you're using one of those new Canons that are using like 50 megapixels, you'll find you'll have to be more aggressive in terms of how much sharpening or pre-sharpening you apply to your images, just because you're dealing with that much more in terms of files, in terms of file size. And there's going to be a difference between using a camera that has 60 megapixels as compared to one that has 24 megapixels. So you kind of have to get to know your camera to find exactly what that sort of sweet spot is. This was shot with the NX1, which has about, I think, a 28 something megapixel file with it. So you can see here as I go before and after how softer his face is and the hair and the detail of the shirt is, and then when I bring up the sharpening. I'll get into a more detailed video about sharpening or give you a link to another article or video that goes into detail about sharpening. But here we got a huge improvement here. Now this is the part where Josh was talking about localized control. So a lot of people would be very happy with this here, but again, I'm taking a look at this, and despite the fact that I made all these adjustments for the image here, I still find myself paying too much attention to this area of his shirt. I want his face to be a little brighter here. So now I'm going to start applying what's called localized editing, and this is where you use some of the controls that are available in Lightroom to apply effects only to specific areas within the frame. And one of the most powerful tools you have available to you is called the adjustment brush, which is this brush on the far right-hand corner. And what you can do here is that you have a lot of the same controls that you have in the general tools palette when you go into your basic module, but now any adjustment that you make is only going to be applied to the area in which I paint with this brush. So I know I want to underexpose this area slightly here on his shirt. So what I'll do is I'll take the exposure slider and I'll just bring it in kind of slightly. I'm going to exaggerate it a little so you can see the effect. And what I tend to do is I hit the O key on my keyboard, so I can actually see the area where it's getting painted in, and you'll see this sort of red overlay. So I'm going to go into the area that I basically want to make brighter, and don't worry about the fact that I'm sort of overshooting that. That's not really important for right now. If I want to take off that area, I can always hit my Option key and then sort of paint it out. But I just want to make sure that that area that I want affected by the control is painted in. So I'm going to hit the O key again, and you can see how much darker that area has become, right? I don't want it that dark, neither do I want it that bright. But I'm going to just reduce the exposure very, 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 very slightly, and it's like 0.5, so it's about half a stop. If I want to bring out some of that highlight detail, I can go into highlights and I can just slightly tweak it, and that completes the effect there. I'll also want to do it for the hand here because I think the hand is a little too bright. I think I did include that in the initial thing. If I wanted to do this to the window here, I could also do that. So I can hit the O key again just to make sure that I'm painting it into the area here. And I'm using a Wacom tablet, a stylus, which is sort of a pen tool, in order to make this have a little more control. I don't know if you can see it from. So that's getting me closer to what I want. So now I just want to brighten the face. So I'm going to create another tool and create new. And this time I'm going to hit the effects control here. I'm going to double click on it, and that resets everything. So this time I'm going to move the exposure over in the opposite direction, and I'm going to start painting it right into this area on the face. And if I hit O again, you can see the area where this is being affected. And by hitting the left and right bracket key, I can make my tool bigger or smaller. Okay. And then I can start tweaking with exposure. You know, if I want to bring out some of the more shadow detail that's present in his hair, I can do that. One of the things about doing these controls is if you want to see specific detail there, you need to first magnify it before you get into the adjustment brush. Otherwise, you're not able to tweak it. So I'll get this again. Okay, and so you can see how much brighter it's making that area there, this face. Again, if I hit the O key, I can make sure that I'm not missing anything. And again, I'm going to do this really rough. If I was doing this for real, I would be a lot more careful in terms of where I'm painting. Okay. So now, not only can I affect the exposure value, but I can also start playing around with the shadows. If I want to bring up a little more shadow detail, you can see that area right behind his ear that comes up a little more. I'm not going to do it by too much. And then if I want to tweak the contrast, and I can also apply a little clarity just there, but I don't want to do too much because it gets, it blows out the area on his cheek, and I really don't want to do that. One of the things that you can do for portraits, particularly for women, is you actually can reduce the clarity in order to soften it. But again, you need to sort of have a really soft touch with it. I'm going to reduce. Let's see. Yeah, I'll just leave the clarity as is. You can see there's a little blowout in terms of his cheek there, so let me just move in the highlight a little bit to retain that. Okay, and then I'll close out. And then that's the finished result. So again, it's kind of like the other image. It's about taking that raw file and really having a real clear idea in terms of what you want to do with it. This software is pretty amazing. I mean, it has a whole lot of other controls available in there that I'm not going to get into. I mean, there's so many resources out there using Lightroom, but the thing that I want to impress on you guys is that when you're thinking about editing your images, it's one thing to just move these sliders until sort of this overall look is achieved. A lot of people will make all these adjustments, but they're not paying attention to what the core of their image is about. Whether it's the church, whether it's this cowboy, whenever you're making these choices in terms of how you're tweaking it, it's really important to think about what's the most important part of this image for me. Okay, how do I use these tools to accentuate those things that I want to emphasize, and how do I use these very same tools to de-emphasize other things. Like, for example, and this is the last thing I'll show you before I take some questions, is like I can use the vignette, and vignette is a tool that I like to use a lot, but I don't use it to the point that it gets pronounced. Some people apply vignette like it's crack. They just can't stop. I tend to be really subtle with my use of vignette, and in this particular shot, you could get pretty heavy-handed with a vignette, and you hardly be obvious because just the lighting the way it is. But I just kind of just want to go a little slightly darker here, still make him bright, and he's still bright. But this area here where I'm losing detail as a result of bringing the vignette is fine, because all of a sudden you're experiencing him the way that I want you to experience him, and the way that I kind of imagined the shot when I had him posing there in the window for me. So.
Next.
Yeah.
It looks like you're using the lens vignette correction tool. Why that one over the effect post-process vignette that does the luminosity control?
Again, what was that?
So you were applying the vignette in the lens correction, and the next panel down, effect, is the other vignette.
I think it's just a habit. That's just the way that I've done it. So, yeah, no good reason other than that.
Because it doesn't look like that vignette. I always think of that in terms of fixing, like, I'm using a super wide, or I had a lens hood that did it, and I think of that as correction, and the other one is as effect. Are you able to adjust midpoint and feathering or anything like that, or it's just a very broad fix?
Yeah, I mean, I use that second control on the bottom, the midpoint, as a way of sort of feathering the look. Because I try to use it fairly subtly, it's worked for me in that way. I'll have to experiment with the other one to see if it really makes much of a difference in the way that I use it. But it's worked for me for as long as I've used Lightroom. So.
Funny, you say that. I'm saying the exact opposite. I was like, well, I'll have to play with the one you're playing with to see what it does differently than what I've been playing with, because it never occurred to me to use it.
Yeah.
That way.
Hey, everybody. Now I'm seeing everybody that's here that's joined me. Welcome. I wish I had more time so I could show you some more images, but I think that ultimately I know that some people are very familiar with Lightroom and other people aren't. And I know it can be really intimidating. But I hope one of the things that you take away from this is the fact that you can use only a fraction of the controls that are available to you in the application, and as long as you know what to look for, you can make an amazing transformation to your images. I know that Chuck is going to be moving away from Apple Photo into Lightroom after, being betrayed by Apple and his use of aperture. But I think you'll find that a lot of the applications are pretty much very similar. It comes down to figuring out a way that works for the way that you photograph, by the way you see and use the images. That's really the ultimate key, because the question that Josh had for me, I hear that countless times when I go and attend Photoshop training events. There's people going, why do you do it this way as opposed to doing it the other way? And I think like half the time photographers go, I don't know. That's just the way I learned it. That's just the way I use it, and it gets me where I want to get. So as much information as there is about all these applications, I've absorbed a lot of it, and I've discarded probably 75% of it. Because as far as what I need in order to achieve my images, I only need this much. And then there may be some cool techniques or different things that I can do to make me more efficient. And if I discover it and I apply it and it works, I'll keep it. Otherwise, I'm just going to go. Because I've tried so many different things that people have posted on the internet saying, you should try this for sharpening, and you should try this for white balance. And I've tried all that stuff, and then eventually I either adopt it or don't. So don't be intimidated about the fact that there's only one ideal way to do anything, because there isn't. It's like dancing. You're going to find your own groove eventually, and if someone don't like it.
I know you only have a few more minutes. I did have one question about your thought process in the field, in the camera, and enough of us, I'm sure all of us are going, oh, I'll just fix that in post.
Yeah.
I try not to do that, but how does that affect you? When does that impact you? What are you thinking, or it just never occurs to you, like, I'm just going to get my shot?
No, when I'm out there, one of the first things that I do, anytime I go out, if I go out with my camera, when I go out that day, I'm presetting everything. I set my my ISO for the quality of light, the amount of light that I'm going to be dealing with. If it's a cloudy day, I'll set my ISO maybe to 400, maybe even 800. If it's a bright sunny day, I'll set it for 100 to 200. I'll set my ISO for that. I'll set my white balance accordingly, whether it's sunny or cloudy, and then I'll set my aperture to f4 or 5.6. And sometimes I'll use the auto ISO, or I'll even use the auto white balance because I'm shooting raw. And then I'll just preset my aperture for about f4 or 5.6. So regardless of which way I choose it, I always know what my starting point is. But more importantly, it gets me ready so that if I see something that I want to photograph, I don't have to be figuring out my settings or figuring out whether or not the settings that I had set the evening before for a party that I shot under fluorescent light at 6400 ISO is going to ruin the first picture of the day because I wasn't paying attention. So, but when I'm out there shooting, I'm very conscious of trying to nail the exposure, more importantly than anything else. But thankfully, with the metering systems that are in most of these cameras, there's very little tweaking of exposure that I have to do. If I'm shooting a backlit situation, or I have a subject that's wearing like all black or all white, I'll use the exposure compensation control on my camera to either go up or under, because from experience I kind of know that if a person's wearing a white shirt, it's going to underexpose the shot, so let me open it up by 2/3 of a stop, or vice versa. So I'll make those tweaks, and then usually my exposures are usually within a half a stop. Sometimes they may be off by as much as one stop, but that's increasingly less likely, because the metering systems on today's cameras are so sophisticated and so advanced that you can do it's hard to take a bad picture technically, other than focus, which is an altogether different discussion. Anything else?
Yeah. Hey, what kind of mic is that you're using?
This is an SM7B, a Shure SM7B, popularly known as the mic Michael Jackson used for his vocals on Thriller, though you're not going to hear me sing.
Oh.
No, it was my birthday. It was my birthday present to myself last year, because I'd used so many cheap mics, and I finally said, "Damn it! I've been doing this 9 years. I deserve a good mic."
Is that the setup you use for your podcast, and do you use the same setup for This Week in Photography?
Yeah. If you hear me on any of those podcasts, I'm doing this, using this, or if I'm out in the field, then I'm using a whole different kit.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I want to do with you guys is that I want you guys to actually work on a raw file. So what I'm going to do is tonight or tomorrow, I am going to post one of my DNG files, which is the equivalent of a raw file, and I want you guys all to try your hand at editing the image and then posting it, and then we can have a discussion in terms of, how different people interpreted it, because I think it's really interesting to see how different people see and interpret a file. People have very different tastes, very different aesthetics, and it's really remarkable to see what happens, because it's like, I'll do it one way, and then I'll see someone else, and I'll just go, wow, I never thought about doing that. So that should be kind of fun. But okay. So how do you guys feel about that? Is that something you guys are open to?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it should be. It should be.
Well, hey, what kind of do you have to have a specific raw plugin in the editing software that you're using to be able to work on the raw files?
If you're using the latest version of Photoshop and Lightroom, and no, you don't need it. What I'll probably do is I'll put up one of the images that I shot from the X100S that I have, because that's a couple of years old.
Yeah.
So even if you're not up to date with the software, you should be able to open up the files. And I'm going to be sending a DNG file, which is universal. It's not the native file that comes out of the camera. So you should be able to open it with virtually any application that's out there. That shouldn't be a problem.
Okay.
So if you guys want, and you guys want to communicate with each other, you guys can. What I'll do is I'll stop the. Okay. Let me see. Okay, what I'll do is I'll stop the recording, but you guys can still talk amongst yourselves if you recur to. Is that something you guys would be interested in doing, or?
Yeah, sure. I'll see why not, right?
You're just gonna see my empty room. Amazing. Okay, very cool. So thanks for joining me, guys. And it's going to be the end of the recording here for you guys. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. And I'll see you next time.
All right, see you.
All right, see you.